Let Clark tell you. Good morning. I feel like we should have given you some yogurt or something with them and make a little parfait or. Good morning. Jackson's the end of the second row. Of what? Why? So I need to send some. So 16. Is it going to be 13 re-revised or 16 revised? Michael has to figure it out and be very specific with me because I can't do the math on that and be present in here. So he needs whatever it is, if it's 13 re-revised or 16 revised, I need you guys to be very specific so I can push it out correctly. Because like I can't. I don't even have a digital copy of the project. No. Yeah, I don't like I can't. I also don't have Craig. So Michael, I don't know. I sent out what you guys posted. Like what I. Okay, hold on. What is this? But like, so that we're gonna.
Aw, thank you.
Oh wait, so is this a challenge? Now
Yes,
do I have to
yeah,
bring
you
my,
got yes,
my
yes.
Oregon blueberries. Is that what you're doing, Shelley? Okay. I did not clearly. So
Yes, yes. Are you? Yes.
I just said that to Shelley. I go, oh,
You guys
this
need
is a
to.
challenge.
You guys need to fight.
Good morning, everyone. The meeting will come to order. I note that a quorum is present and that each member has before them copies of the material on our agenda today at their place on the rostrum. Without objection, the chair may recess the committee subject to the call of the chair at any point during this meeting. And once again, good morning. Today's committee will consider H.R. 4763, the Financial Innovation and Technology for the 21st Century Act, or FIT for the 21st Century Act. Legislation marks a significant milestone in the House Committee on Agriculture's efforts to create a much-needed digital asset regulatory framework that protects consumers and investors while promoting American leadership in finance and technology. I want to thank Dusty Johnson and French Hill, my co-leads on this legislation, for their hard work on this regulatory framework, as well as Patrick McHenry for being a great partner in this process. Before we get into the finer details of this legislation, I want to share how the committee got to this point. For years, Congress has debated the treatment of digital assets. In fact, this committee held its first hearing on digital assets in July of 2018, which led to many subsequent meetings, briefings, roundtables, hearings, and panel discussions, most of which were bipartisan, and all with the goal of bringing regulatory certainty and clarity to these novel and emerging technologies. This work aimed to bring members and staff up to speed on the purpose, role, and use of digital assets, how current market structures for commodities and securities operate, how digital assets fit and do not fit into existing regulatory regimes, and why congressional action is needed to bring these assets under federal oversight. This work was also informed by various legislative proposals, including my bipartisan Digital Commodity Exchange Act, which aimed to resolve the spot market gap at the Commodities Future Trading Commission by creating a regulatory framework for the trading of digital commodities based on existing frameworks in the Commodities Exchange Act for the derivatives market. All of these activities helped lay the foundation for informed and thoughtful policymaking, but we have always known further coordination between committees, members, and regulators would be required. That is why late last year, House Financial Services Chairman McHenry and I agreed to embark on a joint effort to work collaboratively and craft a comprehensive digital asset market structure framework. We set our eyes to an ambitious plan, but one that was driven by logical and sensible principles for digital asset regulations. Our plan not only produced the comprehensive legislative framework before us today, but also included a joint subcommittee hearing on digital assets, the first of its kind. From these events, we learned that current federal laws and regulations provide few rules of the road for those who want to engage with these emerging technologies, leading to complicated enforcement actions by regulators and creating further confusion in the industry and the market. To address these concerns, this legislation provides certainty on digital assets to market participants. It fills regulatory gaps at the CFTC and the SEC. It bolsters American innovation, and it brings needed customer protections to digital asset-related activities and intermediaries. Before I finish, I'd like to ensure all members of this committee that our efforts on digital assets have not overshadowed our work and our commitment to the 2023 Farm Bill. I want to thank all of our members for the exhaustive and constant work related to the 2023 reauthorization. This committee has a large jurisdiction, and I've always said that we can walk and chew gum at the same time, and that is proof. This is proof. Now, I have no doubts this committee will deliver a strong farm bill that focuses on the needs of those who grow, process, and consume the food, fuel, and fiber we are blessed to produce here in the United States of America. Both our Farm Bill and today's legislation are much-needed priorities that we have a responsibility to deliver on. And I now please recognize the distinguished ranking member, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott, for any opening remarks that he may have.
Thank you, Chairman, and I really want to thank the Chairman for taking on this complex task. It's a volatile market, and we're attempting to regulate it. And so I want to just thank you for that and your efforts. It's a tough challenge, and to create a whole new regulatory regime, especially now without input from me or my Democratic colleagues as you were drafting it. And I do hope you will allow us to participate and be able to pass some of our amendments that I believe will help make it a better bill. I also want to appreciate the efforts of my Democratic colleagues, particularly Ms. Carol Veo. Our subcommittee ranking members done a great job in trying to bridge the gap between what was in discussion drafts and what the CFTC needs to act in this space. And so, Mr. Chairman, while I am unable to support this bill now in its current form, I do believe that we definitely need to act in this space. I just cannot accept this bill as we look at it today without amendment. However, I commit, as always, to work with you, Mr. Thompson, to get this bill to a better place. As it currently stands, the bill is inadequate on several levels, and as such, I cannot support it. First and above all, this bill has inadequate consumer protections in what we know is a very chaotic market. Secondly, it encourages vertical integration by allowing entities to register as an exchange and as brokers. But fundamentally, the funding, despite developing a new framework, it does not provide any new funds for the CSEC or the CFTC to carry out the provisions of the bill. Instead, it would take $120 million from the Treasury Department. And Congress has already allocated that to the Treasury Department. We need to give the CFTC and the SEC the funding that is required. As we had the chairman of the CFTC in, and he asked for and said we need $120 million. That needs to be appropriated directly to him with no strings attached so they can do the job, as opposed to taking it from a committed source in the executive branch. And I'll tell you what else it does, starting as early as next year, in 2024, and for the next 3 years after that. This bill before us would effectively take Commission's reserve fund to pay the cost of registration fees. This would jeopardize critical programs and operations at the Securities and Exchange Commission, which do in fact go towards protecting customer retail investments. And the fact of the matter is that the CFTC is widely already underfunded, whereas the SEC's annual appropriations are generally offset by fee revenues, which helps ensure that the Commission's operations are deficit neutral and often helping in more adequately securing its appropriations. Mr. Chairman, funding is a key factor of enforcement in a normal year. And the CFTC would have the resources to adequately prosecute just 2 enforcement cases. And that's why I believe this funding scheme is wholly inadequate. And if I may mention, the bill, as the bill stands now, it lacks investor protections like third-party audits and the disclosure of financial statements so investors can make educated decisions about the financial health of the insurers and if they are indeed a good investment choice. And beyond those specific problems, I see that there are additional gapping holes in this legislation that will allow hedge funds and pension funds to invest in these markets without their dealers even being registered. And by not registering, they won't even have the most basic customer protections like segregation of funds, conduct of standards, or conflict of information. Because this bipartisanship is important to me and is important to my Democratic colleagues, we will offer amendments to improve upon the bill and address our concerns. And these amendments take this bill from an industry sort of giveaway to being something closer that could work for our retail investors, and I do hope that we will get support from our Republican friends and truly make this a bipartisan bill for our amendments to make it a better bill. And thank you for yielding me the time, and I do look forward to working with you earnestly on this critical piece of legislation. Thank you very much.
I thank you, gentlemen. The bill H.R. 4763, the Financial Innovation and Technology for the 21st Century Act, is now before the committee for consideration. Without objection, a first reading of the bill will be waived and it will be open for amendment at any point. I'd like to remind members that only those sections of the bill that fall within the Agriculture Committee's jurisdiction will be considered and open to amendment, and only amendments germane to the subject matter before us today shall be in order. I now recognize myself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4763, which is at the desk. This amendment makes targeted changes only to sections of the bill within the jurisdiction of the Agriculture Committee. These changes are reflective of member and stakeholder input and technical assistance from the CFTC. So without objection, the reading of the amendment is waived, and the substitute will be considered as original text for the purposes of further amendment. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. As with any legislative product, our best policies are those that we work on together. The ANS is the culmination of countless meetings with both Republicans and Democrats, federal agencies, including the CFTC and the SEC, market participants, and industry stakeholders who provided their feedback and technical assistance as we look to refine our legislative product. Among the many provisions in this bill provides the CFTC with jurisdiction over digital commodities. It establishes a process to permit the secondary market trading of digital commodities if they were initially offered as a part of an investment contract. It imposes robust customer protections on all entities required to be registered with the CFTC. It creates a digital commodities exchange framework that is similar to the existing exchange frameworks in the Commodities Exchange Act for designated contract markets and swap execution facilities. It builds on the existing commodity market requirements imposed on futures commission merchants to protect customer assets. It codifies the establishment of Lab CFTC at the CFTC, which will serve as information resources for the Commission on Financial Technology Innovation. It establishes a joint CFTC-SEC advisory committee on digital assets, which will consist of at least 20 market participants who will provide advice to the CFTC and SEC related to digital assets, and requires the CFTC and SEC to conduct a joint study on decentralized finance and financial market infrastructure improvements. Additionally, the ANS provides fixes to some of the concerns our Democratic colleagues as well as the CFTC have shared with us for over the past few months. This includes providing $120 million over the 5 years to CFTC to carry out the implementation, administration, and enforcement duties under the Act, modifying provisional registration for CFTC entities to reduce the implementation burden on the agencies and better execute our intent of such registration, and including effective dates for each of the titles so the CFTC has a deadline to finalize the rules. We sought to be as thoughtful as possible as we crafted this legislation. This bill allows this committee the opportunity to play a key role in shaping the future of how Americans can access and use novel and unique digital technologies to potentially improve our daily lives. And I urge my fellow colleagues to support the ANS and move forward towards final passage. And do any members have remarks on the bill? Mr. Johnson is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I think one of the things that frustrates so many of us in this town is that the House, most of the activity of the House is focused in one of 3 areas, either messaging bills that are one-party endeavors, and they're not going to become public law, right? Number 2, the must-pass stuff, when those deadlines are looming and we're about ready to careen into a disaster. Well, yeah, then Congress can get our act together. And then we do some suspension bills. Those are important, but they are generally not of material significance. It's pretty unusual for us to do something that is important, but isn't a must-pass right now. We're pretty good at kicking the can down the road, right? Well, maybe we'll do that next year. Or, well, maybe after the next election, the numbers will be better and we can do it our way. This is pretty remarkable because it doesn't fit into any of those normal congressional activity buckets. The process, Mr. Chairman, has also been remarkable, and thank you for that. It's been two committees working together with very, very few turf battles. It's been a bipartisan conversation all along. And anybody who wanted to be bored silly by digital assets talk week in and week out has had an opportunity to do so. Hearings or roundtables on a bipartisan basis in February, in April, in May, in June. Discussion draft conversation about an earlier version of this text in May. 3 of those meetings in June. 2 of those meetings in July. And so here, after an admittedly windy road, because real legislation always has a bit of a windy road, we find ourselves in a position where we're going to be able to do 2 very important things. I would note that the experts that we heard in all of these hearings and roundtables we brought in, there was really a consensus that developed around the fact that these 2 things needed to be done, and the ANS and the underlying bill together do that. First off, we need a cop on the beat. Mr. Scott had noted that there are inadequate consumer protections. Well, let's be clear. Right now, there are no consumer protections. There are some, but there is no real cop on the beat. Some people might think the SEC is doing it. Ladies and gentlemen, they're not. The SEC has never exerted or never asserted jurisdiction over the tokens or the products that make up 70% of the market volume in this industry now. There is no spot market regulator in this space today. This bill changes that. I would also note that we need certainty and predictability. I know a number of us kind of wonder about the use cases for these tokens, for these currencies. I actually think that the cryptocurrencies distract from the real value proposition. I don't think next week, next month, or next decade I'm going to go buy something on my phone with Bitcoin at a retail establishment. It's just too easy to do that in USD right now, right? But when you look at the blockchain technology, that has the opportunity to improve the efficiency, improve the processes that so many parts of the economy use. Now, I don't know exactly how they'll use it. We have a tendency to overestimate the impact of technological breakthroughs in the short term, to overestimate their impact in the short term, but underestimate their impact in the long term. I don't know anything for sure, other than the fact that blockchain technologies over the long haul will have a big impact. And our question, the question for our country, the question for this Congress is, do we want that innovation in the blockchain space to go to China, to go to Europe? We have heard experts sit at that table and tell us that volume and innovation has been slowly trickling to other shores, and that if we provide some certainty and some predictability, we can bring it back. I'll talk more about Dr. Caraveo when she offers her amendment, which I do think substantially improves the bill. But just by quick note of passing, I would say, Mr. Scott, thank you for calling out her leadership because she's been tenacious. There are not very many people who like spending time with me. There are not very many of you who, your laughter hurts me a little bit. But listen, I've only been here for 4.5 years, but that's certainly long enough to know that none of you want to talk to me at length on Saturdays and Sundays. But I would tell you that that's what it took. Real governance, real legislating. So often we come here and we are disappointed when we realize that we're just handed scripts to read. Dr. Caraveo actually brought a group of people together and tried to legislate, and I'm so grateful.
Ms. Johnson, thank you for the accuracy of all your statements. And now recognize the gentlelady from Colorado, Dr. Caraveo, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Johnson, for the kind words. About 70% of digital assets are currently unregulated, An entire market of investment has developed over the last decade for which we have no real rules and minimal ability to intervene in order to protect investors. That leaves a huge number of retail investors unprotected in a volatile market class where many people have already lost their life savings. I believe it is our responsibility to engage in a legislative process that, while it may be messy, while you may have to put up with Mr. Johnson, while it may be difficult to understand, should be the first real step towards regulation of a market that more and more of our constituents are coming across and engaging in every single day. Whether it's through an app on their phones, a kiosk at a convenience store, or a social media thread touting the opportunities of cryptocurrency, consumers are putting their money every day into a system that they may not realize is unregulated, and therefore they may not realize the risk they enter into with every single transaction. We have heard resoundingly at many meetings and through hearings that there is a gap in our oversight of the digital assets cash market, and that the status quo is currently unacceptable. I believe we must act to protect more FTX-like from preventing FTX-like disasters. As the ranking member on the House Agriculture Subcommittee on Commodity Markets, Digital Assets, and Rural Development, I'm grateful for Chairman Johnson and Chairman Thompson's openness to working with me in a true bipartisan effort to take this first step to improve transparency and protect investors in this space. I'm also grateful for the great instruction that I got from the CFTC in regular conversations and technical assistance to really delve into this bill. I'm especially glad to see that with the ANS, CFTC funding that we have been advocating for has been included. This funding will be vital in the CFTC taking on further oversight activities and engaging in a rulemaking process. And I hope that we can continue to work together to make sure that the CFTC remains properly funded in future years. I'm also glad that with the ANS, we have further customer protections prioritized. Making sure that consumers and retail investors are protected is my #1 priority, and I believe that we have made significant improvements in that direction through our discussions. I do look forward to continuing those discussions to ensure that proper customer protections continue to take place in this industry. This is not a perfect bill, but I believe that it is a good step in the right direction, and I look forward to continuing to work with the majority on improving it. Legislating, much like the practice of medicine, which I'm much more familiar with than cryptocurrency, is an art. As a doctor, I approached any issue that my patient had as a process. You look at the symptoms, you determine how they are connected, you develop a list of possible diagnoses, you collect data and consult specialists if necessary. You have hard conversations, and you repeat the process as necessary to see if you can improve on the situation the patient was in when they first came to you. You also look at what the primary issues are that absolutely are needed to save the patient's life, and then you tackle secondary and tertiary issues after that. When possible, when legislating, I believe in following the same process. You evaluate the problem, you collect data, you determine possible remedies, you learn from experts and from having hard conversations, and you repeat as necessary to improve on the situation you first found. I am glad to have been able to engage in that process in this issue, and we've also tackled the primary issues that the CFTC was most worried about through the ANS and through the amendment that I will be offering that I hope will be accepted. I do not believe that the current situation is acceptable, which is why I'm very supportive of taking necessary steps and following the necessary process to provide further federal oversight over digital assets. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. Now recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Molinaro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've only been here for 7 months, but it is refreshing to see such unanimity in our view of Mr. Johnson. That's in return for a comment I received yesterday from Mr. Johnson. Mr. Chairman, I want to join my colleagues in acknowledging and thanking you for your leadership, the work of this committee, Financial Services, and I genuinely want to thank Representative Johnson for his earnestness and diligence in working across 2 committees of jurisdiction in a very bipartisan and open way. I come from a state where, and I've spoken about this before, where states like New York are beginning to occupy the field, and because of it are creating a patchwork of regulation where Congress has yet to act. This bill begins to remedy that while also embracing this technology and the innovation and jobs and economic stability that comes with it. I'd like to also thank the staff of both committees who've worked diligently to bring us to this point today, and it is refreshing that we are moving ahead earnestly. This is a multi-year effort to develop this bill, and this is the most comprehensive attempt yet at finally delivering a regulatory structure for digital assets here in the United States. This bill is not whether or not you believe cryptocurrencies are a good idea or if you foresee a productive use for blockchain technology, although we must in the future. This bill is about protecting consumers and regulating billions of dollars in investment that already exists and will continue to grow where no such regulation exists. The bill is about giving U.S. companies a fair chance to succeed without creating arbitrary rules made up as we go along. Regulation by enforcement is not a policy. And by now, we should all recognize innovation will always outpace Congress's ability to regulate advanced technology. And our goal should not be to try and control blockchain innovation, but instead ensure that we harness it as with a robust and flexible regulatory structure established to accommodate the inevitable accelerated growth. This bill would be an important and long overdue step in providing clear rules for market participants and bringing oversight to hundreds of billions of dollars in invested funds. It is abundantly clear that SEC rules cannot accommodate digital assets by themselves, and pretending to do so will only result in litigation-exposed investors and innovation moving overseas, weakening our competition and our economy. This legislation is carefully crafted and pragmatic. It is a solution that finally brings clarity to an industry that has existed in limbo for over a decade. It's existed in regulatory limbo and enforcement purgatory. I'm very grateful, Chairman Thompson, for your leadership, and again to Mr. Johnson and colleagues on both sides of the aisle in two committees of jurisdiction who've worked collaboratively to bring together and gather stakeholders and hold dozens of roundtables and hearings to address our concerns. This final product reflects that effort, a diligent and earnest and refreshingly bipartisan effort. I'm excited that we're taking this historic step today. It's one of the reasons I wanted to serve on this committee and serve in this Congress at this time. And I strongly encourage my colleagues to join in supporting the bill. And with that, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentlelady from North Carolina, Dr. Adams, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, if you go to gas stations and convenience stores in my district, there are crypto ATMs that charge consumers exorbitant fees for money they can barely access to buy so-called currency that has declined in worth over the past months and years. Consumers in my district and the country should know that they're not investing in digital assets as much as they're playing the lottery, especially given this bill's inadequacy in terms of consumer protections. All people who buy cryptocurrency, investors or bettors, are they investors or are they bettors? Because either way, the house always wins. Beyond the retail level, crypto firms pose risks if they are exempt from registration while engaging with ECPs like banks and pension plans, playing games with the American people's retirement savings. It almost feels like one needs to hand more information over to prove eligibility for SNAP than a firm does to register as a crypto dealer. In my view, that opens too many doors for crypto con men. The dizzying structure this bill would create is a fast track for investor confusion, which bellies this industry's supposed commitment to financial inclusion, which has really taken shape in a more predatory fashion. We can barely teach financial literacy in this country, and the industry now wants to push financial literacy around crypto, all while it actively manufactures investor confusion through policy like this bill. So why not start there? While the concerns about funding the CFTC so that it may in adequacy perform what meager measures this bill proposes have begun to be addressed, I still have serious reservations about this bill's most recent form as written. Were there more time and cross-aisle collaboration on this bill, perhaps it would reflect a genuine desire to regulate this scam-rich industry that is rich for structural change, but here we are. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Joe Lay. Now recognize Congressman Austin Scott from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, want to thank you for the open process and the amendment process that we're about to go through. I'm going to vote for some of the amendments and have an open mind to those and hopefully vote to put forward the legislation to the floor. I do think that the absolute lack of regulation now is a problem, and I hope to see the bill pushed forward. There is one thing I want to express concerns about, and this actually falls under the jurisdiction of the Financial Services Committee, but it's under Title III, Section 302 of the bill. I just want to make sure that the SEC doesn't use this as an excuse to relitigate things that they have already litigated. And we have situations where people have spent tens and hundreds of millions of dollars in court against an extremely aggressive SEC. And I just want to suggest that as this bill moves forward, we need to make sure that we look at language that does not give an overly aggressive SEC any opportunity at all to take people back to court that they've already had to settle with in court. With that, I yield.
Gentleman yields. Now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Costa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for your efforts on this important piece of legislation. And I, too, want to commend the efforts of the irascible representative from South Dakota, Mr. Johnson, who I, most of the time, enjoy in terms of the exchange and the banter. Not all the time, but his tenaciousness is obviously evident always. Dr. Carvalho, I want to commend you for your efforts on this work product because it really shows the tenacity and really the promise you show as a new member of Congress and the approach that you take. I think this is a bipartisan effort. I think it needs more work. I think the journey that Mr. Johnson described, complex legislation that is important, that develops is really a matter of course. And so while I hope to support most of the amendments before us, and I hope to vote on final passage, I reserve my judgment on what the final work product will be like when that happens. And I don't believe that the final work product is here today. And that's why I say it's a work in progress. We will have to continue to get the good input from our ranking member here on the committee, who serves on both committees and has had a long history on financial services. Chairman Johnson, I appreciate your process. We can walk and chew gum at the same time, I do believe. And so the fact is that I don't see this as a situation in which if we don't provide movement, we're going to provide the continued vulnerabilities to the consumers of America without the protections that this framework begins to establish. Is it enough? Probably not. It's an effort to really coordinate between our regulatory framework today and what is occurring with cryptocurrency and blockchain innovation that, frankly, I think is complex, complicated, and I think the overwhelming majority of Americans don't truly understand. And therefore, we need to begin, and this is, I think, an important step in that process. So we'll continue to work on this, and we'll see what the product looks like when the final vote comes before us here today. But that will just be the first part of what I think will be a longer-term effort that this committee must continue to work on in terms of our oversight, in terms of our role of crafting the sort of law that ultimately will protect the American public as we move on this new brave world that we are dealing with. And I think that, you know, we look at some comparative analysis with regards to what we have not yet done in terms of establishing a framework on the internet, what we're trying or struggling to do with artificial intelligence. And frankly, I thought Mr. Johnson had an apt description of the three buckets in which we legislate here. I would not disagree with that descriptive. And so here we have an opportunity to make some progress. So I think with that spirit of bipartisanship that we should move forward, continuing to put our best efforts. When we can agree, we should agree, and when we have to agree to disagree, we obviously do that as well. So I think my intent is to continue to support this bipartisan effort as it moves along, realizing it is a work in progress. What happens if it's successful in getting out of committee and off the House floor to the Senate, we'll have a different product that will look like, but it will hopefully be with the same goals in mind, and that's providing an important regulatory framework to ensure that the innovation of cryptocurrency and blockchain technologies as we advance forward to ensure that America's economy remains the economy in the world, that we at the same time protect the American consumer, and that we maintain our competitiveness in this world global economy that we live in. So with that spirit of hopefully good thoughts, I intend to look at these amendments, and I want to thank the chair, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentleman, and now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Jackson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank the chairman and his staff for working with me on an important concept as it relates to increasing both transparency and consumer protections. When nearly $8 billion in customer funds were missing during the collapse of FTX in November 2022, it demonstrated just how important these concepts are. The bill that we're marking up today is meant to create regulatory certainty in the U.S., which will allow companies to create and pioneer digital asset technologies for future economies. But in doing so, it is imperative that Congress strikes the right balance between fostering innovation and protecting consumers and investors. We must work to promote and, if necessary, require the adoption of technologies that provide public access to information, which is a key component to instilling broader confidence in the marketplace. One such concept is zero-knowledge proofs, which enable exchanges, stablecoins, asset managers, and custodians to prove their solvency safely and efficiently to customers, to lenders, and to regulators on a frequent and consistent basis without divulging private information. As you all may be aware, in my home state of Texas, digital asset service providers have recently been required to separately account for customer funds in an effort to ensure meaningful consumer protections. I believe Texas's actions will serve to increase consumer protections as well as instill confidence and trust among market participants. If we want to be serious about preventing the next FTX, then making custodians and exchanges provide verifiable evidence that they hold the assets they claim to have in their custody is essential to building trust and credibility in the digital asset space. We here on this committee should all remain committed to working to vet and advance these critical new emerging technologies. I look forward to working with all of my colleagues on these issues, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentlelady from Illinois, Congresswoman Slotkin, for 5 minutes.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, I'm from Michigan, Illinois. What in the hell?
I guess you were corrected.
Yeah, well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, we all know I want to thank the chairman and the ranking, Mr. Johnson, Dr. Caraveo, for their good work on this. We all know that Congress is being presented with a bunch of tech-related issues that, like, I dare say the flip phone generation is not best positioned to handle and to address. We need to learn. We need to talk with each other. This is, cryptocurrency is one, but we know artificial intelligence. We know a whole bunch of cyber issues, space issues are coming to us, and people are asking us for frameworks from which to sort of understand these things, and we have to struggle through it at a moment in our history when we are not real healthy as a legislative body. So I sort of doubly appreciate the work given the context and all the other drama that goes on here every single day. We all know that most of our constituents, or many of our constituents, feel the effects of crypto in sort of negative ways, right? So every single K through 12 school in my district has been ransomed. Some have paid, some have not. But in every single instance, the way that they pay that ransom is through cryptocurrency. We know, as we heard from my colleague here, you can go through communities in my state and there is all kinds of crypto, Bitcoin ATMs, and it's unclear to me what kind of protections anyone, particularly in our inner cities, have on those things. We've seen the fall of FTX. We've seen a lot of get-rich-quick scams where celebrities and all kinds of people are attracting often low-income people to a get-rich-quick scam. And giving them alternatives to sort of the traditional ways that people make money. And we know that 3/4 of investors in crypto have lost money. By one cybersecurity firm's report, there's been a loss of $2.3 billion by Americans due to crypto scams or ransomware attacks. That said, as Representative Johnson said, the underlying blockchain technology is super interesting, worthwhile, going to be with us, going to be part of our lives. And so how do we make sure we deal with this technology to make it a positive thing, a force for good instead of a force for bad? I think it is very important, and I know my colleagues across the aisle have mentioned the importance of transparency. For all of you who have talked about transparency, I encourage you to get on to the bill. We just reintroduced it this morning, that members of Congress should disclose their cryptocurrency holdings on their financial disclosure form the same way they would any other investments. I know that members of Congress on the financial services committees have voluntarily declared their crypto holdings. If we're going to be providing oversight regimes, we should acknowledge how that may or may not impact all of us sitting around this table. But I do think that this framework, with the good adds that Dr. Caraveo and others have added, help bring in the issue of consumer protection into this conversation. I think that this bill is not perfect. I certainly understand the comments of like, it's a work in progress. I think where I come down is that it's hard to beat something with nothing. And while this is, I acknowledge, the beginning of a story, not the end of a story, we have to get this story started because the public is asking us as a legislative body to do and provide oversight. So I thank everybody for their work. I know this is hard stuff to do, but I think the world is asking us to move the ball forward, and I think this does that. So thanks very much.
Well, I thank and my apologies to the lady from the state of the hand. Now please recognize the gentleman from Kansas for 5 minutes, Mr. Mann.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your leadership on this. You know, in Kansas right now, it's hot, like it is many other areas. This Saturday, we all travel a lot. This Saturday, I took a few hours to take my 4 kids to the pool for the first time all summer. Was uninterrupted, no calls, no texts, except I got one phone call from Mr. Johnson talking about this bill. And I know that the gentlelady from Colorado spent 2 hours on the phone with Mr. Johnson Saturday. I got off easy. I just traded a couple of voicemails with him. But in all seriousness, really appreciate his work and effort in leading the charge on this. You know, as we've been in this process for a while now, I feel like 2 things have really emerged to me as high priorities. Number one, we've got to have some clear rules of the road for consumers and for the market. And this bill does that, or begins to do that. And number 2, we've got to make sure with whatever we do not stifle the blockchain in our country and all the innovations that could occur. And I feel what's happened is, you know, blockchain has been talked about, starting to be understood by some, you know, not by others. But then artificial intelligence comes along this year and is kind of the new shiny things and has captivated everybody. But meanwhile, if we don't get it right from a regulatory standpoint and we stifle blockchain innovation in this country, we are making a massive error that we will miss out on as a country for decades. This is not a perfect bill. as we all understand. A couple of things that have come up that I would just like to comment on. One, there was a comment that this would yield nothing more than being a conduit for crypto ATMs. This bill actually, crypto ATMs, crypto would now be regulated under this bill, and the folks doing that would then have to be a dealer or a broker, and they'd be required to comply with the customer protection requirements. So this bill actually addresses exactly that. On the funding side, I appreciate the ranking member's concerns on funding for the agency, but the facts are that this bill contains $120 million to fund the CFTC. These funds are available immediately and without restriction for the purposes of implementing, administering, and enforcing the new requirements of this act. This bill fully funds the request the CFTC chairman made when he sat at that table on June the 6th of this year. So we asked him point blank, what would it take? And this is the response to that, and that funding is included in this bill. We worked with our colleagues on financial services to find offsets for that new spending, and that offset passed out of the Financial Services Committee yesterday by a vote of 35 to 15. So we, as I see it, have a choice. It's, do we do something, and do we consider some amendments to potentially make this better, or do we as a Congress continue to do nothing? I think we need to do something. We're way past time to do something. Fully support this, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is anyone else that wishes to speak on the bill? Mr. Duarte is recognized for 5 minutes.
Yes, and thank you, Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity. And I appreciate Mr. Johnson. I am unlike many, perhaps. But I do have some skepticisms on certain aspects of this bill. Blockchain technology is important. We've discussed it, and we believe that it's going to solve a number of business problems, or at least have the potential to solve a number of business problems. We certainly want to encourage companies to raise capital and attempt to solve problems. And that can be done through a common stock issuance, which has a regulatory framework, which lets them put their forward-looking statements, their capital structure, their facts set together. The concern I have with this bill, and stablecoins, we should know if stablecoins are actually backed by the claimed deposits of dollars or other common currencies that they claim to be backed by. So stablecoin assurances should be backed by an audit framework, and this bill may enhance that and provide that. My concern with this bill centers around the regulation of cryptocurrencies themselves. Cryptocurrencies that occur nowhere but in the ether of the exchanges, that have no fact set. At a number of hearings, a number of private meetings, I have asked, what are the fact sets that can be verified by the Securities Exchange Committee or Commission or the Chicago Board of Trade? And I can't get the answers. There are no fact sets that I'm aware of that are associated with the cryptocurrencies that are simply floated out. They have volumes, they have transactions, they have people bidding on them, but they have no fundamental facts behind them. They have no capital structure. Again, they exist in the ether of the exchange themselves. And I do not believe that we help protect investors at the retail level by presuming that these fact-free assets can actually be regulated by the SEC or the Commodity Futures Board of Trade. So these are my concerns. I'm listening today. I have immense regard for those who've been in the middle of this bill, but I sit in a very, very possible no vote against the bill in general until we understand that the regulatory agencies actually have something to hold on to regulate. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now please recognize Congresswoman Davids from Kansas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm actually just hoping to chime in for a moment about Mr. Johnson. We don't agree on everything. We have certainly gotten sideways on certain issues and worked together on certain issues. I'm happy to talk to you on a Saturday if you want to discuss things further about the legislation. I appreciate your work and the efforts you make of being bipartisan, particularly in this committee on transportation and infrastructure. With that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Any other members wish to speak on the bill? All right, seeing none, hearing no further discussion, the committee will now consider the whole amendment in the nature of a substitute. Does any member have any amendment to the bill? And with that, I recognize Mr. Jackson from Illinois for amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Thompson. Thank you, Ranking Member Scott. Thank you, Mr. Johnson, Duarte, and your leadership, Representative Cavero. My amendment would strike the provisional registration by striking Section 105 of the bill, which is entitled Notice of Intent to Register for Digital Commodity Exchanges, Brokers, and Dealers. This would correctly put the registration requirements in place when the final rules for oversight, registration, data collection, and disclosures are issued jointly by the SEC and the CFTC as required in the bill. To allow the crypto spot market to sell itself as a regulated entity by allowing this section, allowing for intent to register before those regulations are completed would be an absolute injustice to our constituents and to retail investors. Crypto is currently rife with fraud. According to the FBI's recently released annual Internet Crime Report, more than $10.6 billion was lost due to online scams and fraud in 2022. This industry needs to be under full force regulation and oversight. Otherwise, we're legitimizing markets without the tools in place for the CFTC to root out bad actors, and will allow a surge of investments into these markets with no cop on the beat. I yield back my time, and thank you, Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. The amendment has been circulated and should be in front of each of us at this point. Does any other member seek recognition to speak on this amendment? If not, I will take 5 minutes to speak on the amendment. Now, I thank Mr. Jackson for his amendment and his willingness to engage with us in this process. The Notice of Intent section provides the opportunity for entities who cannot yet register with the CFTC to be brought into a measure of limited oversight. The Notice of Intent requires entities to open their books and records to the CFTC, provide certain customer disclosures, and segregate customer assets. It's also important to note that Section 105 does not limit the authority of the CFTC to bring anti-fraud or anti-manipulation enforcement actions on bad actors. Without this notice, customers and investors will not have extra protections afforded to them until rules are written and finalized, which could take years. Now, I don't want another FTX to happen between enactment and the effective date of the act. And therefore, I urge my colleagues respectfully to oppose this amendment. Any other members seek recognition to speak on the amendment? Mr. Johnson is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, you said it exactly right. And of course, we all understand what Mr. Jackson's, who has been engaged in this whole digital assets conversation for months in good faith. We understand the difficulty of the provisional registration period. There's really no perfect solution. I don't think, it's going to take a year for them to get rules pulled together. And so what are the governing, what do we do during that time? And I think doing nothing is worse than doing the provisional registration, as imperfect as it is. We've had lots of conversations with the CFTC to try to design a better mousetrap. Admittedly, where we're at isn't perfect, but there isn't a perfect solution. And so with all respect to Mr. Jackson, I'll be opposing his amendment as well.
Mr. Kassar is recognized.
Chairman, I'd like to speak in favor of Mr. Jackson's amendment. I appreciate everyone's hard work on this, but as folks talk about there needing to be a cop on the beat, needing to have rules of Sorry about that, y'all. I do think that I worry that this provisional registration program becomes the status quo for too long. We know how long it takes sometimes for rules to be developed. We know that there's oftentimes powerful forces trying to stop those rules from being developed, and we don't want this to become a safe harbor for activity that none of us would support. So I appreciate Mr. Jackson bringing forward the amendment. And I yield back, Chairman.
Anyone else seeking to speak on the amendment? All right, hearing no further conversations, the question is on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed saying no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to. Other amendments?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment on the desk, number 8, that would strike the bill and replace it with asking for the SEC and the CFTC to come together for an advisory board and bring back recommendations on how to handle this. Can I speak to the merits of the amendment?
Mr. Kazar has offered amendment. The clerk will report and distribute the amendment.
Amendment number 8, offered by Mr. Kazar of Texas.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. I now recognize the distinguished gentleman, the sponsor of the amendment, for up to 5 minutes for an explanation of his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You don't have to be a crypto skeptic or a crypto booster to understand that we need to be careful when we're rewriting the laws that govern our financial markets. In fact, you don't have to have any of your money in cryptocurrency to have to be worried about whether the Congress, in trying to adapt our laws because of the existence of crypto, could create loopholes that threaten your life savings, that threaten your pension and your retirement. Our current laws were written after the Great Depression. They're not perfect, but they've helped prevent some of the worst things that we learned from the Great Depression. We have a special responsibility to make sure everyone's savings and retirement are protected, and I'm worried that racing to change our laws could threaten people's savings. And that's why I oppose the bill today, because I don't believe that it will actually protect everyday Americans as much as it creates even greater risk. The bill weakens our securities laws by undermining the definition of a security, by replacing a functional test like the Howey test with a test that's based on technology, like whether you have a decentralized blockchain. That could create a loophole that have other folks that have their securities use that kind of loophole to evade our securities regulation that has been crafted in the wake of financial ruin. The bill does not adequately protect consumers and investors, in my view, and I believe that crypto legislation this committee pushes forward should provide at least the same level of investor protection as current law does. I know there's some initial funding in the bill, which I appreciate, but that funding is only for 5 years. And now, as the majority has recommended cuts to both the CFTC and the SEC during the appropriations process, I don't feel confident that we have the level of funding for either the SEC or the CFTC to keep Americans' investments safe. There's probably a wealth of other potential loopholes in this bill, but this is a complex bill that wasn't given to many of us in its final form or even to the SEC except for just a few days ago. And so while I agree with everyone who has stated here that there are regulatory gaps that we should address through legislation in the crypto industry, and I'm open to working with good faith on those gaps, I think we should be concerned about creating loopholes that could harm our greater economy. So that's why my amendment, co-sponsored by my friend and fellow committee member here, Congresswoman Salinas, asks us to take a step back. It strikes the current text of the bill, asks the SEC and the CFTC to create a joint advisory board to look at those gaps, figure out how we fund adequate regulation, address the jurisdictional issues, including questions about which digital assets are securities versus commodities, report on those findings, and bring them back to us. There's precedent for this kind of advisory board. Such an advisory board was established in the wake of the 2008 recession. These issues are complex. They are far-reaching. They are urgent. But we shouldn't do more harm than good. And I worry that with the current text of the bill, it creates the kind of loopholes that could have folks that are putting their money into cryptocurrency continue to lose their money. And for people who have their retirement, their savings, their pension money out there outside of cryptocurrency, that it could put that at risk as well if the loopholes that we create undermine the lessons that we learned and the laws we put in place in the wake of the Great Depression. So I urge passage of this amendment so that we can create a different path towards coming up with how we address those gaps without creating potential risk for our financial system as a whole. Thank you, Chairman.
I thank the gentleman from Texas. Any other members wish to speak on the amendment? The gentleman from South Dakota.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to talk about your leadership for a little bit. We've talked about the journey of this bill on the 118th, but let's be clear. You didn't start this journey in January, sir. Many of you have grown accustomed to Kevin, a detailee from the CFTC. That's where he normally works, but he's been with us for 2 years, sir, because of your leadership. The legislation that you and others introduced in the 117th really launched a detailed and in-the-weeds conversation about what should this look like. And I get it. You can always study something more. And we're going to have an opportunity to study this even more because when this comes out of committee, it doesn't become the law of the land right away. We are going to, as Mr. Costa mentioned, hopefully have some intense conversations with the Senate. And I know most of you know this more than I do. But there's a certain ripeness to addressing issues in this town. And the door we don't do as much as we should because the door doesn't open very wide very often. There's always a reason we can't do health care, or we can't do immigration, or we can't do this, or we can't do that. That's not right. I really feel, Mr. Chairman, that the opportunity is ripe to do something now. And so I would ask, rather than strike the entirety of the bill and just have us study it for another year or 2 or 3, while American competitiveness lags in this technological era, instead, let's move forward in a process that you began, sir, a number of years ago. I would urge a no vote.
The gentleman yields back. Mr. Jackson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I am in support of Mr. Cassar's bill. There's a difference between being on the bleeding edge versus the leading edge. I find it sometimes it's not necessary to be first, but to be safe and right. So for that, I support Mr. Cassar. There are clearly regulatory gaps, even in our definition of this asset, on whether or not this is a digitized commodity, whether or not this is a security. So let us proceed with caution would be my concern. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Mann from Kansas recognized.
I oppose this amendment. I feel like the whole point here is that we need to tell the SEC and the CFTC, give them some clarity on where the jurisdictions lies, and this does this. If we were to support this amendment, it just further lengthens this process, which is a concern I've had all along, and I really appreciate it. I want to speak to the process of this legislation. We've had multiple discussions, drafts, bipartisan. We've sat around the table. One concern I had 2 or 3 weeks ago was just to make sure that we are telling the rule writers how much time they have, what the shot clock is. We don't want this to needlessly drag out. That's why the 360 1 year came in there. I wish it was sooner than that, but that seemed like a reasonable amount of time. But it is way past time for Congress to speak, to provide clarity to the market. If this amendment would actually move us in the other direction, and the time to act is now, and this is the way to do it. So I oppose the amendment.
I believe the gentleman from California, Mr. Carbajal, seeks recognition.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to echo my support for the Cassar amendment. I also want to recognize the good faith work that's gone into the product that's before us. I think it's been a good effort, but I think that this is such of an important issue and complicated that we got to get it right. And I think the potential danger to consumers and the devastation to our economy if we don't get it right could be very devastating. So I just want to speak in favor of Mr. Casar. I think he articulated my sentiments exactly. And with that, I'll yield back, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman yields back. Recognizes the gentleman from New York, Ms. Molinaro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I oppose the amendment. I would offer that, as Mr. Johnson offered, this has been an ongoing dialogue within Congress, certainly before I got here. But what's been most impressive, Mr. Chairman, has been the very deliberate and earnest way in which both parties in both houses have, in two committees, have come together to craft what is our best step forward. The good news is, as we negotiate ultimately with the Senate, at least the House is putting forward to regulators what we think should be basic safeguards. That, I hope, would send a message to regulators that, that Congress is acting and that they should take that in consideration. As I mentioned a few moments ago, we also have the added burden and challenge that states, in particular, like New York and others, are moving forward with aggressive regulation, in some cases chasing the industry out of not only their state but the country as a whole. And additionally, I'd offer it would be one thing if we were on the cutting edge, if we were taking the first action. But countries like China, Great Britain, of course, the European Union, and others have already taken bold steps to establish either safeguards and regulation within their own economies or incentives to attract the innovation there. We have the benefit of learning from their missteps, learning from those regulatory structures, taking action in a document, in a bill that does provide our best effort to create appropriate safeguards. At the same time, we have an obligation to catch up, and this bill allows us to do that. And for that reason, I oppose the amendment and hope that we could move forward with this and perhaps find ways to broaden consensus around those areas where there still might be disagreement. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Ms. Salinas, Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do want to thank the subcommittee ranking member and the chair of the subcommittee. They both did yeoman's work on this, and thank you for your extra time on the weekends. I actually did enjoy speaking with you, so thank you. I do support this amendment. I do think the underlying framework could put us in a more perilous position, and for me, it really is about the workers and the investors, and whether it's retail investors or my pension funds, my workers put into those funds, and I worry that we are headed down the wrong path under this current framework. I appreciate, again, the work that has gone into this, and I would hope that we could start off with some better footing before we get to this point, but thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. I recognize myself for 5 minutes. I want to thank Mr. Casar for his amendment. However, I must oppose the amendment as it seeks to replace comprehensive regulatory framework for the digital asset marketplace in its entirety with a study focused on the core objectives of the bill. The committee has held numerous briefings and hearings where we've heard directly from regulators and market participants on the need for clear rules of the road for the digital asset ecosystem. For example, earlier this year, CFTC Chairman Benham testified in front of this committee and said, quote, "I have consistently highlighted the need for congressional action to address the lack of federal regulation over the digital commodity market. I have been clear in my testimony before Congress as well as in other public statements that bringing this volatile market out of the shadows and into the regulatory fold would protect customers, ensure market resilience and stability, and prevent contagion to the traditional financial system," in quotes. Additionally, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen testified in front of the House Financial Services this year where she said, quote, "There are some gaps like spot markets for crypto assets that are not securities. We would like to see your regulatory framework over those markets, and there are gaps in regulation," end quote. So by putting forth legislation in the space, we're responding directly to concerns voiced by both regulators and market participants while fulfilling our duty to set clear rules for the digital asset markets. Now, I believe we know what we need to do, and that is the legislation that we have before us. For this reason, I have to respectfully oppose the amendment. Any other members seek recognition, wish to be recognized? Hearing no further conversation, the question is on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Those opposed saying no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to. I believe Mrs. Adams has amendment number 9 at the desk, and the clerks will circulate that. And wait a minute, gotta find my right page. There we go. She's offered an amendment. The clerk will report and distribute the amendment.
Amendment number 9, offered by Dr. Adams of North Carolina.
So without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. I now recognize the distinguished gentlelady from North Carolina, for the sponsor of the amendment, for up to 5 minutes for an explanation of her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Exchanges have a lot of discretion in complying with statutory core principles, including flexibility to comply with them in various ways. This amendment would add a core principle for digital commodity exchange, a principle calling for diversity on the board of directors of the exchange. Specifically, under the core principle, a digital commodity exchange, if a publicly traded company shall endeavor to recruit individuals to serve on the board of directors and the other decision-making bodies as determined by the commission, exchange from among, and to have the composition of the bodies reflect a broad and culturally diverse pool of qualified candidates. This core principle already exists for futures exchanges and was enacted as part of Dodd-Frank. The amendment that created this core principle for future exchanges was offered by former Representative Kissel from North Carolina in a markup of a pre-Dodd-Frank swaps reform bill considered by the committee in February of 2009. It was adopted by the committee by voice vote. In the 13 years since the enactment of this provision in Dodd-Frank, we've heard no complaint, no problems, no issues with the diversity core principle or its applicability to futures exchanges. There's a lot of rhetoric about how digital assets could be a game changer for underserved communities and communities of color under the banner of financial inclusion. If that's the case, promoting diversity in the top echelons of this industry should go hand in hand with that sentiment. So, Mr. Chairman, I urge support for my amendment, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Any other members seek recognition to speak on the amendment? Ranking Member Scott.
Well, I want to really step forward and commend Ms. Adams on this very, very important amendment. And I would hope that each member of the committee will support it in a bipartisan way. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Any other members seek recognition to speak on the amendment? Not, I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. I thank the gentlelady for her amendment. I know this is an important issue. It's important to her. It's also an issue that's important to me. I believe that all parts of the corporate ladder reflect all parts of America, but I have deep reservations about mandated diversity requirements. We're talking about very small organizations typically in this space. However, it is conversations like these that remind us all about the importance of diversity and the need to cultivate it everywhere. So while I cannot support the gentlelady's amendment today, I hope that we can all agree on the importance of broad, culturally diverse institutions everywhere. And I yield back. Any other members seek recognition to speak on the amendment? If not, hearing no further conversation, the question is on the amendment. All of those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed saying no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to. Ranking Member Scott has an amendment at the desk. He's offered amendment. The clerk will report and distribute the amendment. Oh, yeah. Number 11, amendment number 11.
Amendment number 11, offered by Mr. David Scott of Georgia.
Thank you. Without objection, amendment will be considered as read. I now recognize the distinguished ranking member from Georgia, the sponsor of the amendment, for up to 5 minutes for an explanation of his amendment.
Thank you very much, Chairman. As you are well aware, we're here today to give the CFTC greater authority to regulate what is now a sort of a chaotic marketplace. We sit here today talking about how good the CFTC is at what they do, that we trust them to regulate and enforce in a market that will undoubtedly change between today's consideration and the next farm bill and maybe even the next election. We're here today considering a bill that will provide additional funding for fiscal year 2024, 25, and 26, which will allow the CFTC to establish the rules of the road for the market. But, and however, we also sit here today with this very well-respected organization, the CFTC, that has not been reauthorized since 2008. 15 years it has not been reauthorized. And also, ladies and gentlemen, as some of you may remember, it became an international issue when the European Union wanted to take over the control of our clearinghouses, CME, when we did cross-border negotiations. It was very embarrassing. And they used the fact that we have not reauthorized the CFTC in over 10 years at that time. And they used that to say that they now, the European Union, would be the authorizing source for the CFTC when we did cross-border. Well, at that time, this committee's leadership stood up. Myself, as well as my friend Austin Scott, and Mike Conaway back at that time, Chairman Peterson. And we held a meeting, and the European Union came over, and we definitely gave them a peace of mind that we will never allow any foreign entity to regulate our United States financial system in the world's market. But yet still, right now, as we are now embarking on another big endeavor that we're handing to the CFTC, it is very important that we send a powerful message that nobody is to regulate our financial industry cross-border but the CFTC. So I'm asking this committee, as we step forward on today's major piece of legislation, let's do the right thing here, and let's give our CFTC the respect and the authority they deserve by reauthorizing them. And I ask for strong bipartisan support on this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the ranking member. Any other members seek recognition? The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and I thank the ranking member for this great amendment. We had a wonderful meeting yesterday with CFTC Chairman Benham and discussed the critical role as we're looking at digital assets. Authorization is certainly part of it, but also we need to look overall at the bill. Cryptocurrency, otherwise known as digital assets, can be commodities. They can be futures, they could be securities. And Congress has a responsibility to determine that line between the SEC and the CFTC. This jurisdiction must be established. Right now in the current market, there is ambiguity. You have conflicts in enforcement between the CFTC and the SEC. You have an uncertainty in the market, which is affecting overall prosperity in the market. And we need to make sure we establish basic consumer protections. And so I think the bill today is a good starting point to that debate. My main concern initially was that the CFTC needs the resources for these greater responsibilities. So I was pleased to see $120 million over 5 years be included. That was consistent with at least the minimum amounts discussed by the CFTC, Chairman Bennon in his testimony to our committee and in other sources. This amount only has meaning, though, if the CFTC doesn't ultimately get cut through the appropriations process later on. So that's something we'll have to look forward to. But I also look forward to a continuing dialogue on consumer protection enforcement going forward with our House and Senate colleagues, and I plan to support the bill today and yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize Dr. Caraveo from Colorado for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the ranking member for his offering of this amendment. I think that working on this digital asset market structure bill is a worthy endeavor, but the work here further emphasizes our need to reauthorize the CFTC. The passing of 15 years between reauthorizations is far too long for an agency, much less one we are asking to adapt to new technologies and markets. I support the efforts to reauthorize the CFTC to continue to set the agency up for success in both funding and authority to address developing concerns. And I look forward to working with the ranking member and the majority and finding a path forward for the CFTC's reauthorization.
Thank the gentlelady. Now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Austin Scott, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want you to know that I agree that we need to handle the reauthorization of the CFTC. I do question about this being the mechanism to do it. I don't want it reauthorized in a piece of legislation where the Financial Services Committee, which has no jurisdiction over the CFTC and should never have any jurisdiction over the CFTC, has any say into it as it comes to the floor. So I'm committed to work with any of the members of the other party to get the reauthorization done, but I would think it would be better served in a different piece of legislation.
Gentleman yields back. Anyone else seek recognition to speak on the amendment? If not, I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. I want to thank my dear friend, the ranking member, for his amendment. I share his commitment to, and I like the way he said it, respect and authority for the CFTC. And quite frankly, we want to make sure that we maintain that agencies and what is under our jurisdiction, that we are responsible to make sure that we do the reauthorization. Allowing it to go beyond what the expiration date, whether it's the Farm Bill or quite frankly CFTC, is unacceptable. Earlier this year, we committed to working together on the reauthorization as Congress, and I intend to honor that promise. Reauthorization of CFTC is long overdue, and this committee needs to correct that. With the last reauthorization taking place in 2008. Now, we must ensure that we're thoughtful in our approach and to ensure our derivative markets continue to flourish and remain the most robust in the world. I think we have a thorough, transparent process that we need to engage in that conversation. And we really, as much as we work with the CFTC and we work with them closely with this particular piece of legislation, it's a broader discussion that I know that we're capable of having and doing in a thoughtful, deliberative way. We must ensure that we are thoughtful in that approach to ensure that our derivatives market continue to flourish, remain the most robust in the world. And with that being said, I don't believe that this bill is the appropriate vehicle for such action, nor do I think we have had that more robust, deliberative process of discussion that it deserves if we do this in a respectful way. And so I believe that working together, the ranking member and I in this committee, we can lead the committee to reauthorize the CFTC and make significant improvements to the Commodity Exchange Act outside of digital commodities. Also a bit concerned, it's a bit of a muddled process since this is a bill that's jointly held with the House Financial Services Committee, and I would be very concerned with, as the other Mr. Scott from Georgia, I live in the land of Scots here.
place to be.
It's a good place to be, Austin said. I'm not sure about that. I may move over next to Dusty, actually. I don't want to have any kind of perception that CFTC is provided oversight anywhere except within this committee. And that's just another concern with this particular bill in reauthorizing the CFTC, just for me personally. And so I welcome the opportunity to engage with the ranking member on this issue and really robust work on this and the final reauthorization of CFTC. And I know, Ranking Member, your priorities for that process, and I want to work with you on those. So I have to oppose this amendment today, but I'm looking forward as we continue to discuss these issues and begin that robust oversight and discussion of CFTCs so that we make sure we equip them in this reauthorization as it should be for 2023 and going forward. And I yield back. Any other members seek recognition to speak? All right, if not, hearing no further conversation, the question is on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed by saying no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to. Now recognize the young lady from Colorado, Dr. Caraveo, who has who's offered amendment, and it is amendment number 1. And the clerk will distribute the amendment. Where are we?
Amendment number 1, offered by Dr. Caraveo from Colorado.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. I now recognize the distinguished gentlelady from Colorado, the sponsor of amendment number 1, for up to 5 minutes for an explanation of her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to submit this amendment, which would amend Section 105 to include a requirement that a person desiring to file a notice of intent to register shall be a member of a futures association. This registration will require that they comply with the rules of the association pertaining to customer disclosures and protection of customer assets. The National Futures Association's responsibilities include rulemaking on industry best practices and strong investor protections. I have often heard them described as the gold standard. I believe the increased customer protections provided by requiring entities to join a futures association will ensure that the notice period is not a time where industry is allowed to operate without any oversight and will allow agencies a level of transparency. Additionally, this amendment would require entities to say they are not registered with or regulated by the CFTC in a prominent manner on their disclosure documents, offering documents, and promotional material. In no way during the rulemaking period should they be allowed to imply that they are under CFTC regulation and actively attempt to misinform customers. The period it will take for agencies to engage in rulemaking cannot be a vacuum in which entities have the cover of noticing the agency an exemption from certain enforcement actions without any proper rules in place. This amendment makes sure that customers have a level of protection needed during this time. Thank you once again to Chairman Johnson and Chairman Thompson for working with me on this issue, and I would encourage my colleagues from both sides of the aisle to vote yes on this amendment.
I take the liberty to recognize myself for 5 minutes to speak on the amendment. First, I want to thank Dr. Caraveo for her work on this legislation. I've seen her at every hearing, page turn, and briefing that we've done on digital assets, and I appreciate Dr. Caraveo's amendment, which significantly improves the customer protection in the bill's notice of intent section by requiring entities to be members of a registered futures association and comply with its rules. We're providing customers with significant regulatory oversight and customer protections that have been afforded to traditional market participants for decades. I appreciate Representative Caraveo's willingness to work with us and perfect our legislative product, and I will support the amendment and encourage my colleagues to do the same. And I yield back. Other members that seek recognition, Congresswoman Crockett is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I first want to begin by thanking my fellow freshman classmates, the author of this amendment, Dr. Caraveo, for her leadership on this issue, not just on the specific question of notice of intent to register framework, which is critical, and I'll get into that, but on the whole digital assets bill in general. For any folks at home who don't know, the Congresswoman from Colorado really dug into this bill and really dug into understanding digital assets. That includes the opportunities the technology has to offer, the key consumer protection safeguards, and the intricate regulatory authorities needed to bring a more than $1 trillion market out of the shadows. She did all of this on top of her already massive responsibility of serving as the ranking member of the Rural Development Subcommittee during a Farm Bill reauthorization year. Add to that everything you've got to do just to keep your head above water as a freshman. And I think I speak for all of us in here when I extend my thanks and accolades to Dr. Caraveo for her work. I must also extend my appreciation to the majority. Frankly, the beginning of this process did not play out as many of us would have liked, as everyone heard at our previous hearing back in June. But over the past week, I just wanted to say that I appreciate the majority's willingness to work with us on what I hope are some common sense amendments, because I believe I speak for many of us in this room when I say I want to see Congress pass a bill to regulate the crypto industry. This is an industry and technology that has the potential to meaningfully improve the lives of Americans and really people from all over the world, from all walks of life. But right now, many consumers are rightly wary getting involved with an asset that today has no meaningful regulatory oversight. Over the past few years, consumers have been hurt, lives have been ruined because of unscrupulous actors who were able to take advantage of congressional inaction. If we do not set out a regulatory framework, if we do not give the CFTC the new 21st century authorities to address 21st century problems, more people will be hurt. And because the financial aspect and the technical aspect are intertwined with crypto, this shadowy spot market is slowing adoption of cutting-edge technologies. So to be clear, I want Congress to pass a bipartisan, robust framework that will enable innovation, protect consumers, and ensure the soundness of a market. But despite the commendable work that has gone into this current bill, I think I speak for many of us when I say the current text does not yet meet the standard we need set, particularly for consumer protection. So I hope everyone on this committee from both sides of the aisle can come together to address these shortcomings as we work through these amendments, which brings me to the first amendment we have in front of us. It was number one, but which is Dr. Caraveo's. The bill creates a provisional registration model that has people come in and file notice of intent to register while the CFTC and SEC make final rules. Now, who knows how long this could take? So Dr. Caraveo's amendment to require these people to join a trade association will ensure strong consumer disclosures and other best practices as necessary. By making sure digital asset exchanges and digital asset brokers are part of this association from the day this bill is enacted into law with this amendment, we will have a more sound market with greater customer protections. But of course, the rules will take some time to be finalized, which is why the other provision in Dr. Caraveo's amendment is critical. These people are filing a notice of intent to register, but are not actually registered with the CFTC. And the amendment ensures that these exchanges and brokers make that crystal clear. This is a common sense amendment that I think most of us feel very strongly needs to be included in this bill. I urge my colleagues to adopt the amendment and look forward to a productive, engaged markup that will hopefully produce a bipartisan regulatory framework. With that, I yield.
The gentlelady from Texas yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Austin Scott, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to support the lady's amendment as well. I think it's a step in the right direction. And my comment is not about your amendment as much as it is self-regulatory agencies. Congress has no oversight of these agencies whatsoever. My wife is in an industry where she has to be registered under one of these self-regulatory agencies. That agency recently came out with a rule that said you have to turn over your personal checking accounts. Not your business checking accounts, but your personal checking accounts. And I think that's ridiculous. I think it is a clear violation of people's rights as American citizens. And I do think that we need to make sure that if we're going to allow these self-regulatory agencies as much control over industries and citizens as they have in their businesses, that it's time for us to take a look into how some of these self-regulatory agencies operate. By the way, the head of that self-regulatory agency is paid somewhere around $3 million a year. This is a quasi-government agency. And I do think that your amendment's right, but I also believe that we as Congress, when we're giving these self-regulatory agencies this much control, we need to turn around and set some rules of the road for those self-regulatory agencies as well. And nobody in a self-regulatory agency should be paid $3 million. That's not a competitive practice. That's not someone that's a great doctor, great lawyer, great CEO. It's not a lottery winner.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir.
Where would one apply for this position?
If I don't get the job, I'll let you know. But needless to say, my wife won't be regulated by them because she won't be working if I get it. But I just want to bring that to people's attention in this committee. The self-regulatory agencies need to have, there needs to be some oversight of those agencies. But I'm going to support your amendment, and I think it's a step in the right direction.
Any other members seek recognition? Ms. Johnson.
Oh, it was probably the first week after I'd gotten to Congress, some veteran member had told me, you know, it's always easy to vote no. You can always find a reason to vote no. And he said that sort of in a self-satisfied way, as though he'd cracked some elaborate code. I thought about that comment a couple of months ago when Kevin McCarthy relayed to me a very similar story where he was trying to get a member to go vote yes on something. And the member said, you know, Kevin, it's just so easy to vote no. I could vote against the Bible if I needed to. And the now speaker said, you'd vote against the Bible? Why? Well, there's not enough Jesus in it for me. That's sort of the easy way out. And that's not the approach that Dr. Caraveo took. She saw a bill that was not good enough. She rolled up her sleeves. She assembled a team to work in a very weedy, line-by-line way to make the bill better. And there are a number of amendments today that are the fruits of that effort. I know Ms. Crockett, Mr. Jackson, others also have things that either got included in the ANS or as standalone amendments. They've made the bill better. And I just want to thank Ms. Caraveo for not taking the easy way out, but for instead doing the kind of hard blocking and tackling that when we all ran for Congress, maybe not all of our colleagues, some of them just like being on cable news, but the people who choose the Ag Committee are here because they actually want to be legislators. And thank you for not taking the easy way out. This is a very good amendment. I'll be voting yes.
Gentleman yields. Any other members seek recognition to speak on the amendment? Hearing no further conversation, the question is on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Other members have amendments at the desk. Ms. Craig.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Craig, what?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
You got an amendment desk, and it's amendment number. Let's see, we're looking. No, it's not numbered. What, number 14?
14.
Yeah, amendment number 14. So the clerk, Ms. Craig has offered amendment number 14. The clerk will report and distribute the amendment.
Amendment number 14, offered by Ms. Craig of Minnesota.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. I now recognize the distinguished gentlelady, the sponsored amendment, for up to 5 minutes for an explanation of her amendment.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Scott for holding today's markup. And Mr. Chairman, I look forward to welcoming you to Minnesota next week for Farm Fest. You know, a well-regulated financial system keeps our country strong and prosperous while protecting Americans and their livelihoods. While I'm happy to see my colleagues engaging on the issue of cryptocurrency, and I agree that there needs to be regulation for the industry, I'm concerned that this bill, as written, does not protect consumers enough. As someone who worked for years in the private sector, I understand the importance of investor relations, but also recognize that consumers deserve to know the value and volatility of their investments. It's our responsibility as members to protect consumers, and my amendment speaks to that. My amendment addresses the risks and volatility that customers expose themselves to when they invest in digital assets. Specifically, this amendment amends the customer disclosure requirements to make sure that they provide meaningful insights to investors, including trading volume and asset volatility. While this bill does require that entities disclose the underlying source code, few individuals have the know-how to examine that code and identify potential cyber threats or discrepancies. What the public needs to know is that the source code can hold up against sophisticated hackers and that a level of security is maintained. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. We need a bill that will robustly protect consumers while allowing for innovation. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for the opportunity, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes to speak in support of this amendment. I appreciate Representative Craig's amendment, which really brings greater customer protections to the marketplace. This amendment is consistent with the bill's focus on strong customer protections and ensuring that they have the information they need to understand the markets. It is critical customers' disclosures are easy to read, easy to understand, and easy to follow. I also want to thank Ms. Craig and her staff for working with us to perfect her amendments. I enjoyed working with her and hope that we can continue to perfect the underlying bill together. And I will support this amendment and encourage my colleagues to do the same. And I yield back any other members that wish to be recognized to speak on the amendment. Well, seeing none, hearing no further conversation, the question is on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Other members that have Congresswoman Bozinski, you recognize. Which?
Amendment, Mr. Chair, I have an amendment, Amendment 13 at the desk.
Okay, amendment. Congresswoman Bozinski has amendment number 13 at the desk. And the clerk will report and distribute the amendment.
Amendment number 13, offered by Ms. Budzinski of Illinois.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. I now recognize the distinguished gentlelady to sponsor the amendment for up to 5 minutes for an explanation of her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to first start out by, again, thanking you, Chairman Thompson, also Ranking Member Scott, Chairman Johnson, and our Ranking Member Caraveo for all of your work on this important issue. I also want to take a moment to especially thank our Minority Committee staff for working so diligently with me to address my concerns and in creating what I view to have been a really collaborative effort. This amendment, Amendment 13, adds important protections to the framework before us today by closing loopholes, threatening the rights of customers, and protecting us against volatility. Segregation of customer funds is a critical protection to protect against misuse of funds by crypto companies. In the last year, we saw sudden bankruptcies of many crypto exchanges, which had been deemed leaders in their field, the adults in the room, quote unquote. What resulted next is customers lost their ability to withdraw their funds, and with no bankruptcy protections for customers, customers were forced to wait in line while larger investors with dedicated lawyers scrambled to recoup their investments. It is critically important that we make it clear that the election to participate in blockchain services is voluntary, and access to these markets is in no way conditioned on giving up the critical protections of customer segregation. I've spoken with the chairman, and this is his intent, so I am offering this amendment that helps helps perfect this bill and make it clear that the customer always has a choice on how to use the safeguards and safeguard their assets. In my view, this will help close this loophole and advance consumer protection. This amendment also addresses an additional concern I have stemming from the crypto winter of 2022 in ensuring that these companies maintain adequate capital on hand to support their activities, protect their customers, and guard against unforeseen risks.
These are new markets with unique assets. Rather than rely on business practices that have worked for the traditional finance industry, we have to consider the particular risks associated with digital commodity trading. My amendment will help protect customers by adding that the Commission may prescribe minimum capital requirements that address the risks associated with digital commodity trading to better reflect the realities of this emerging market. With that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes to speak in support of this amendment. I want to thank Ms. Budzinski for her amendment, which seeks to clarify critical customer protections relating to both the rights of customers to control their digital assets and the need for sufficient capital for digital commodity brokers and dealers. I also appreciate the gentlelady and her staff working with us to make modifications to her amendment. We appreciate the late night work last night. This amendment is consistent with the goals of the legislation, and I'm happy to support it. I appreciate Ms. Budzinski's willingness to work with us in improving this bill, and I urge my colleagues to join me in support of this amendment. Are other members seek recognition to speak on the amendment? Hearing no further conversation, the question is on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Does there any member have an amendment at the desk? Ms. Budzinski is recognized.
Thank you.
And this would be amendment number?
16, Amendment
number
16 at the
16.
desk. Thank you. One more.
And the clerk will circulate. The clerk will report and distribute the amendment.
Amendment number 16, offered by Ms. Budzinski of Illinois.
So without objection, the amendment will be considered as read, and I now recognize the gentlelady to sponsor the amendment for up to 5 minutes for an explanation of her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The self-certification process at the CFTC works and is critically important to the vibrant and innovative derivatives market we have today. The CFTC has relied on this mechanism for decades, and our markets remain the global standard for sound derivatives regulation. However, an important gap remains for companies who are planning to onboard as new exchange with the CFTC under this bill. In order to use the self-certification process, they need to be registered, but the CFTC cannot possibly approve all of their products for trading on their first day of registration. So my amendment seeks to provide a process for new exchanges to have their products approved as a part of their registration process prior to being fully registered. The intent is for the Commission to approve the exchange's registration and the products at the same time, so that the transition to CFTC full registration is not disruptive. Providing a process to approve products prior to registration would provide the Commission with the needed time to fully evaluate the many new products with exchanges would seek to file on the first day of registration. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Now any members seek recognition to speak on the amendment? No, and I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. I thank the gentlelady for her amendment. She's right that the process to get registration up and running for these new entities is critically important. It's not just important to the regulators, it's also to the customers of these exchanges. But this is a complex process that we need to spend more time on and solicit some further assistance from the Commission to get right. So my question for the gentlelady, whether she'd be willing to withdraw her amendment and work with me and the CFTC staff over the coming weeks to make sure that we get it right before this bill comes to the floor.
Yes, I would.
The gentlelady withdraws the amendment with a commitment that we'll work well together. Mr. Ranking Member, do you want to be recognized? Okay. Any members have amendments at the desk? Mrs. Salinas is recognized, and her amendment number is?
I believe it's 15, Mr. Chairman.
Amendment number 15.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would be remiss.
Well, just a second. So Ms. Salinas has offered amendment, and the clerk will report and distribute the amendment.
Amendment number 15, offered by Ms. Salinas.
Very good. Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. I now recognize the distinguished gentlelady from Oregon, the sponsor of the amendment, for up to 5 minutes for an explanation of her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would be remiss if I did not wish you a very happy birthday today. And I think the whole committee is very appreciative of all the work that has been put into this bill and your leadership, as well as the ranking members. But yes, on this particular day, happy birthday. I hope all your dreams and wishes come true.
I just have to say, working with the Agriculture Committee keeps you young.
So to the amendment, this amendment adds a section to the bill that requires the CFTC to gather information and submit a comprehensive report to Congress on crypto's energy intensity. We know blockchains that utilize a proof of work consensus mechanism consume an enormous amount of electricity, but we have little insight into the scope of this issue, especially at the industry-wide level. Over the past several years, there have been reports of crypto facilities utilizing the output of whole coal plants just for digital mining. And according to Cambridge University, Bitcoin alone is estimated to consume 130 terawatt hours of electricity per year. That's more than many countries, including Norway and Argentina. Bitcoin mining has even caused energy prices to surge for American families. For example, in Texas, where 10 industrial-scale mining facilities are connected to the state's grid, researchers found that increased demand from these facilities caused electricity bills to rise nearly 5%. As we work as a nation to ensure that our power grids are resilient, reliable, and able to meet the energy needs of Americans, further study of this issue is critically important. And I recognize that there isn't a path forward for this amendment at this time, so I will withdraw the amendment, but I do hope to work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to gain more insight regarding the scale of energy utilized by crypto companies and the energy sources on which they are relying. Thank you, and I yield back.
Well, I thank the gentlelady for raising the issue, and it's an important issue and one that deserves our attention, and I appreciate your recognition. The study really doesn't fall within the remit of a financial regulator such as CFTC. Fortunately, this is an issue which has received significant attention both from the digital asset industry and the federal government. And just last fall, the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy released their climate energy implications for crypto assets in the United States. I will ask unanimous consent to be able to submit that for the official record. And I thank the gentlelady for raising the issue, and she withdraws her amendment. Any members have amendments at the desk? Congresswoman Crockett, which number amendment would you have a number on there? Any particular, what number?
I've got committee amendment number 2.
Number 2, amendment number 2. Ms. Crockett of Texas has offered an amendment number 2. The clerk will report and distribute the amendment.
Amendment number 2, offered by Ms. Crockett of Texas.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. Now recognize the distinguished gentlelady from Texas to sponsor the amendment for up to 5 minutes for an explanation of her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment makes 3 changes to strengthen the provisional registration framework. Now, the bill has been through a lot of changes over the past days, and I'm sure many on the subcommittee would say over the last night. But I want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can in this moment. And so as we discuss the notice of intent to register in Title I of the bill, this provisional framework, registration framework, is going to be the primary regulatory framework for the crypto industry until the CFTC and SEC complete their rulemaking for registration, likely over 2 years. Therefore, it is imperative that we act today to make sure that the provisional registration framework is as robust as possible. We must ensure that the framework that governs crypto over the next 2 years is one that empowers our financial regulators, brings transparency to the market, and protects consumers. My amendment would make important advances in all of these areas. First, it requires that anyone trying to file a notice of intent to register must do so with a physical address. If you aren't deep in the weeds on this, such a requirement seems so common sense that it hardly seems worth mentioning. But in a new, unregulated industry, some actors over the past few years have honestly made the claim that they don't have an address and therefore are not subject to the jurisdiction of the place they are living and working in. With my amendment, that practice would end. Digital asset exchanges and brokers could choose not to file a notice of intent to register, but then they would be subject to enforcement action for failing to register. With my amendment, we ensure that people play by the rules and that regulators and consumers know what laws digital asset exchanges and brokers operate under. Second, my amendment would increase market transparency and provide customers with additional information by requiring digital asset exchanges and dealers, when filing their notice of intent to register, to provide information about the specific characteristics of the digital assets they list or offer. It is likely an understatement to say that right now there are thousands of different kinds of digital assets in the world. When it comes to physical commodities, the assets are pretty well understood. We aren't in the habit of discovering new physical commodities like gold or wood and listing them on the exchange, but with digital assets, a single programmer could create a new one over the course of a weekend and could get it launched within a month. Considering the ease with which new digital assets are created, the lack of tangible knowledge about what each one is, it is essential that brokers and exchanges explain the specific characteristics of each of their digital assets. With my amendment, customers and regulators would be able to see for each digital asset listed on an exchange or offered by a broker information like the use case of the token, the financial history of the token, its distribution across its holders, and more. With my amendment, customers will be able to actually know what these digital assets are and why they're listed and offered to trade. Finally, my amendment enhances customer disclosures. Over the past few years, we've seen exchanges go down and customers not know whether or not their digital assets are recoverable. This not only creates confusion and chaos in the market, which has a ripple effect beyond the failed exchange, but in some cases it leaves customers without the knowledge about how to recover their funds, if doing so would even be possible. We've also seen individuals have their personal devices hacked and their digital assets stolen. While some were able to recover their stolen funds, no doubt the vast majority didn't even know how to begin the process of trying to recover their digital assets. All of this is why disclosures about the custody of the digital asset are important and why my amendment ensures that this information is provided to all customers. My amendment also requires that digital asset exchanges and brokers provide customers disclosures about the CFTC Anti-Fraud and Anti-Manipulation Authority and how to enact them if customers see violations. During the provisional registration period, the primary enforcement mechanism will still be the CFTC's Anti-Fraud and Anti-Manipulation authorities. Enforcement action brought under these authorities almost always begins by someone bringing a potential violation of the CFTC. With my amendment, we ensure that customers always have this information in the back of their heads and know who to call if they see something suspicious. So taken together, I believe my amendment significantly enhances enforcement authority, transparency in the market, and consumer protections. These are the rules that will regulate the crypto industry in the interim before CFTC and SEC write their final rules. We have a duty to our constituents to make sure that they are tough and fair. I know my colleagues have some amendments dealing with this provisional registration framework, and I hope we can continue working together through this markup to strengthen the rules that will immediately be in effect. My amendment cracks down on crypto companies who disregard these rules, shines sunlight on murky fly-by-night assets, and empowers customers. With that, I yield.
Young lady yields. Any member seek recognition to speak on the amendment? Dr. Caraveo is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to commend my colleague from Texas for her work on customer protections and disclosures. I think that the amendment that was adopted earlier that I offered was a good start as we look at this provisional registration or notice of intent period now, as we're calling it with the ANS, and her work only amplifies the importance of transparency, of making sure that customers have all of the information they need when they're entering into risky transactions, and that we are protecting them as much as possible while the CFTC goes through its rulemaking. So I would urge a yes and thank her for her work on this amendment.
Okay, got it. Thank you, young lady. A gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I intend to vote for the amendment. I do hope that as it pushes forward, I just want to make sure that in no way, shape, or form are we giving the SEC control over assets that the CFTC is supposed to have. I don't want the SEC to have control over the coin. And I just hope if I've been talking with our lawyers about it, I think it's good as a whole. I just want to make sure that we're not giving the SEC more control than the CFTC as we push forward. Thank you.
Thanks, the gentleman. He yields back. Any other members seek recognition to speak on the amendment? Not, I'll claim my 5 minutes, or less than that, speak on the amendment. As speak in support of the amendment, I appreciate Representative Crockett's amendment, which requires entities which have filed a notice of intent to register to make greater disclosures to their customers. I also appreciate the gentlelady and her staff for working with us to make modifications to our amendments and working with due diligence up to late last night to accomplish that. This amendment is consistent with the goals of the legislation. I'm happy to support it. I appreciate Ms. Crockett's willingness to work with us in improving this bill, and I urge my colleagues to join me in support of this amendment. Any other members seek recognition to be recognized? And seeing none, hearing no further conversation, the question is on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Other members seeking recognition that may have amendment. Ms. Crockett, which amendment would you bring forward now?
It is amendment number 8, and I won't need my entire 5 minutes this time.
Okay. Ms. Crockett from Texas has offered amendment number 8, and the clerk will report and distribute the amendment. Okay, it may be amendment.
Yes, 7.
7, amendment 7, I'm sorry.
I messed it up.
Amendment number 7, offered by Ms. Crockett of Texas.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. I now recognize the distinguished gentlelady from Texas to sponsor the amendment for up to 5 minutes for an explanation of her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment would allow the CFTC to require particular digital assets they find an issue with be delisted without having to come to a joint determination with the SEC. Joint decision-making between agencies is one of the things that takes the longest in our government. The idea that CFTC would find an asset so toxic that they wanted it delisted and would have to wait who knows how long for the SEC to make a joint determination, all while customers continue to trade what the CFTC knows is a toxic asset, is deeply concerning, to say the least. Now, it's my understanding that there are some technical considerations here, and if we were to remove jointly, I certainly wouldn't want to start a jurisdictional battle between SEC and CFTC. So maybe we get the language to read something like saying a joint determination is only necessary if a regulator is trying to delist an asset registered by the other regulator, but otherwise allow a single regulator determination. So in an act of good faith, Mr. Chairman, if you agree that this is an issue we should address and are committed to working with me to address this before the bill gets to the floor, I would be happy to withdraw my amendment.
No, I assure the gentlelady you I have my pledge to work with you to address this. And I really appreciate your amendment, and the section is an important part of the bill, and I recognize your concerns and would like to work with you to resolve them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In that case, I'll withdraw my amendment.
Gentlelady withdraws her amendment. Other members have amendments at the desk. The distinguished ranking member from the great state of Georgia is recognized. And what amendment number, David, do you have? Do you know? 12. The ranking member Mr. Scott has offered amendment number 12. The clerk will report and distribute the amendment.
Amendment number 12, offered by Mr. David Scott of Georgia.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. Now recognize the distinguished gentleman to sponsor the amendment for up to 5 minutes for an explanation of his amendment.
Thank you, Chairman. As we all know, the framework we are considering today would exempt from registration digital commodity dealers that forego dealing with retail customers, excuse me, and only engage with eligible contract participants, which are known as ECPs. ECP include institutional market participants, including banks, insurance companies, pension plans, and state and local government entities. Excuse me, I have this cold. Without dealer registration, customer protections such as requirements for segregation of customer funds, business conduct standards, and conflicts of interest protections do not apply to trading with ECPs. And while I understand ECPs are exempt from these requirements in other commodity spot markets where companies go to purchase commodities such as cotton, rice, or coffee, those traditional markets largely don't include retail investors. And our crypto spot markets are unlike many other commodity spot markets, and those differences must be taken into consideration. So given ECPs typically invest large volumes, their actions in this spot market will affect the markets at large, and so it's very important for CFTC to have adequate authority and oversight ability to fully understand market movements. And my amendment does just that. It closes this loophole. My amendment also addresses DeFi by helping the CFTC get more light shed on the DeFi sector of our industry. As written, this section includes certain ancillary activities. This has the practical effect of essentially exempting decentralized finance, or as we call it, DeFi entities, from regulation or oversight. DeFi is a developing sector of the digital asset ecosystem, which generally utilizes smart contract-based protocols to create financial service products. But at this stage, the industry is still taking shape. And so the CFT had a recent court victory in an enforcement against OKDAO, alleging the organization offered unregistered commodities. And importantly, the CFTC shattered a common industry perspective that DeFi platforms, such as this one, are immune to regulatory security. Now, we cannot respond to the unknown by exempting them from regulation and tying the hands of the CFTC as the legislation before us today does. So, this amendment makes clear that we expect the Commission to take action on DeFi once final rules are adopted. This amendment is very necessary, and I do urge my colleagues to support it. With that, I yield back, Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Other members seek recognition to speak on the amendment. Not, I'll take the liberty of my 5 minutes to speak on the amendment. I thank the ranking member for his amendment. The key issue when it comes to market regulations is ensuring that the regulatory framework is designed to address significant and systemic risks to customers and the market itself. Yet we must be mindful that if we regulate too broadly, outside the parameters of foreseeable risk, we may depress economic activity, which may threaten the vitality of the marketplace. Eligible contract participants are wealthy and sophisticated customers who historically have not been carved into the regulatory scheme of the CFTC. Indeed, they are the only persons allowed to trade over-the-counter swaps. Their spot market transactions require limited customer protections and impose limited to no risk to the marketplace. Accordingly, their activity does not merit regulatory capture. Ancillary activities are similarly out of scope of CFTC's regulatory remit. They consist of mostly administrative or ministerial activities that convey limited to no risk to the marketplace. Accordingly, they fail to raise to the level of regulatory scrutiny. Now, I share the ranking member's concern over the appropriate ways to address decentralized finance, but I believe his amendment, which would regulate first and study later, is the wrong way to do it. I believe that we should study first while the activities of the DeFi remain limited and work to understand the risks and the concerns and then write a law which addresses those concerns based on good information. For these reasons, I respectfully will oppose the amendment. Any other members seek recognition to speak on the amendment? Hearing none, hearing no further conversation, the question is on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed by saying no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to. Any other members seek recognition for the purposes of introducing an amendment? Well, let's see, did we do better in financial services? Ms. Slutkin's not here, but she'd be very happy that we're not at 4 hours. She told me that yesterday. It gave me a challenge. And so we're going to move on to forward here. I'm now going to recognize the gentleman from South Dakota, Mr. Johnson, for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I do move that H.R. 4763 as amended be moved to the floor with a recommendation that it do pass.
Does any member wish to discuss the motion? Seeing none, the question is on the motion offered by the gentleman from South Dakota, Mr. Johnson, to favorably report H.R. 4763 as amendment. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed by saying no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bill H.R. 4763 as amendment is ordered to be reported favorably to the House. I want to thank our team. I thank the lawyers. I thank Kevin Webb, Caleb Crosswhite, and Clark Olivegov for support and their help here. And without objection, the usual instructions are given to the staff that consist of making such technical, clarifying, or conforming changes or as are appropriate without changing the substance of legislation. Any members wishing to submit additional dissenting or minority views shall submit such views to the council's office, room 1407 Longworth, by Monday, July 31st at 5 p.m. This concludes today's business, and thank you to all the members and all the staff. This meeting is adjourned.